It was 3 in the morning when the sound of sirens cut through the quiet ranch night. The stars above the wide Texas sky were still burning, the cattle restless in the pasture, when red and blue lights washed across the wooden fence. But here's the question no one could answer at first. Why would someone call 911 over grass? That was the night Karen, the woman who had turned an entire neighborhood into her personal kingdom, decided that my ranch, my land, and even the way I cut my grass had to bend to her rules. I had always been the quiet one in town. I kept to myself, paid my taxes, maintained my land with pride, not perfection, because out here perfection isn't real. You work hard, you mend what's broken, you mow when the weather and the soil allow. That's how ranch life works. But Karen didn't care about ranch life. She cared about control. It started with notes, slipped under my gate, scrawled in bold marker on HOA letterhead I'd never signed for. Your grass must be cut at a uniform 2.5 inches. We will fine you for noncompliance. The word "we" always lingered, heavy and threatening, even though I never joined their HOA, never signed a contract, never gave them a say in how I lived. At first I laughed, tossed the notes in the fire pit, thought maybe ignoring her would starve her need for power, but the thing about people like Karen, ignoring them is like oxygen. They feed on it, they grow bolder. Soon the phone call started, her voice, sharp as broken glass, cutting into the peace of my evenings. This is a community standard. You are bringing down property values. As if the value of her neatly trimmed lawn outweighed the worth of the land I worked every sunrise. Still I stayed calm. I thought, what's the worst she can do? I didn't realize then that she was already preparing her next move. Because Karen wasn't satisfied with letters, or calls, or threats of fines that had no legal teeth, she wanted to own me, to bend me, to make me kneel to her vision of order. And when I refused, she picked up her phone at 3 in the morning and told the sheriff's department there was a disturbance on my property. I'll never forget the knock. Heavy, impatient, echoing through the stillness. When I opened the door, 3 deputies stood there, their flashlights cutting across my living room like I was the suspect in a crime. Behind them, at the edge of the driveway, I saw her. Karen, wrapped in her pink silk robe, arms crossed, lips curved in a smug little smile, like she was watching her empire expand, 1 acre at a time. The deputies asked if I had been refusing HOA compliance, if I was creating a disturbance. I stood there in my boots and flannel shirt, jaw tight, trying to decide whether to laugh or explode. I told them calmly, this is my land. I am not part of her HOA, and last I checked, mowing my grass wasn't a criminal offense. But Karen had planted the seed. She wanted the officers to doubt me. She wanted them to see me as the problem. And for a moment, I saw it in their eyes, the hesitation, the way they glanced from me to her, the weight of her accusations pressing against the thin line of truth. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about grass. It wasn't about property values. This was about power, about one woman trying to write the rules of everyone else's lives. I didn't know it yet, but that night, under the glow of those patrol lights, was the first crack in her empire. Because what she didn't expect was that I'd fight back in a way she couldn't imagine. And in just 3 minutes, her HOA would cease to exist. Everyone thought it ended that night. The deputies left after telling her it was a civil matter. No crime, no charges, just a warning not to abuse emergency lines again. But Karen, she didn't take it as a loss. She took it as a challenge. The next morning, I stepped outside with my coffee, the mist still clinging to the fields, and there it was, another letter pinned to my gate. Bold, aggressive. This one wasn't just a note, it was a threat. Final warning, failure to comply will result in lien and enforcement action. Lien, a word that hits like a punch to the gut. It meant she wanted to take my land. Now most people would panic. Maybe they'd call a lawyer right away, maybe they'd start trimming grass at dawn just to avoid trouble. But me, I stood there with that letter in my hand, watching the ink smear from the dew, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew something she didn't. Her HOA, it had no authority over me. Not one signature of mine existed on their documents. Not one dotted line tied me to their rules. She had built her castle on sand, and I was ready to let the tide in. But I didn't strike back right away. No, I waited, Because timing is everything. For days, I watched her. She strutted down the street like a queen on parade, clipboard in hand, pointing out trash cans, mailboxes, fences. Neighbors trembled at her words, nodding, apologizing, promising to fix it, as if she was the law herself. Behind closed doors, though, I heard the whispers. People were tired, people were afraid, and people were looking for anyone to stand up to her. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a neighbor named Hank stopped by. Retired veteran, strong handshake but weariness in his eyes. "Heard she called the cops on you," he said quietly. I nodded. He shook his head. "She fined me last week because my flagpole was 2 feet taller than regulation. I thought this was America." That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight. Karen wasn't just coming for me. She was crushing everyone in reach of her little crown. And fear only grows when nobody pushes back. So I started digging. At first, just curiosity. Old town records, land plats, the county clerk's office. The more I read, the clearer it became. Her HOA wasn't just weak, it was broken. Expired filings. Missing signatures, no renewal with the state. She had been running her empire on paperwork that didn't even exist anymore. Imagine that for a second. Years of barking orders, handing out fines, calling police, and all of it smoke. I sat there one night at my kitchen table, stacks of documents spread out, a dim lamp casting shadows across the wood, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, power shifting. The kind of quiet strength that comes not from shouting louder, but from knowing the truth. The question was, how to use it. Because with people like Karen, you don't get just one shot. You need the perfect strike at the perfect moment, so there's no way back up. That's when I decided I wouldn't just defend myself, I'd bring her whole kingdom down. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Friday night, inside the little clubhouse she treated like her throne room. I knew she expected me to show up begging, to argue, to bend. Instead, I was preparing the very document that would end her reign in under 3 minutes. And the best part, she wouldn't even see it coming. Because Karen thought she had power. But what she didn't understand was that power means nothing when it isn't real. The clubhouse smelled of cheap coffee and lemon cleaner that night. Rows of folding chairs lined up like soldiers, neighbors filling them with tired faces and restless whispers. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a courtroom, and Karen stood at the center like a judge waiting to hand down sentences. Her pink sweater was pressed sharp, pearls gleaming at her neck, clipboard clutched like a weapon. She loved this stage. The power. The way people shrank when she cleared her throat. But me, I walked in calm. Slow, every eye in the room turned. Some filled with pity, others with hope. And Karen, her lips curved into that smug half-smile, like a cat waiting to toy with a mouse. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Reynolds," she announced, her voice echoing across the room, "you've been found in violation of community standards. Uncut grass, unsightly fencing, refusal to comply. You will be fined $200 for every day of noncompliance, and further action may result in lien." Gasps rippled. Some neighbors looked down at their laps, others glanced nervously at me. Everyone had heard the rumors, but now they were watching it play out. I didn't flinch, didn't argue. Instead, I pulled a folded stack of papers from my jacket and set them gently on the table in front of her. "Karen," I said quietly, "before you hand out punishments, you might want to look at this." She frowned, flipped the first page. Her eyes flicked back and forth, lips tightening. I watched the color drain from her cheeks as she realized what she was holding: county filings, state records, expiration stamps. Proof that her HOA charter, her foundation of power, had expired over 6 years ago. The silence in the room was deafening. "What is this nonsense?" she snapped, slamming the papers down. "These are lies, fabrications." I leaned forward, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through her denial. "These are government records. Your HOA hasn't been legally recognized since 2016, which means every fine, every lien, every so-called regulation you've been waving around, none of it exists." Whispers erupted. Neighbors leaned closer, eyes wide, jaws dropping. Hank, the veteran, let out a low chuckle from the back row. Karen's composure cracked. She sputtered, pointing at me like a desperate prosecutor. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to undermine the order we've built here. Without the HOA, this community would fall apart. But it was too late. The room had shifted. The power in her voice no longer landed. Instead, people began to murmur questions. Wait, does that mean the fines I paid were fake? She made me repaint my house twice. Was that even legal? She threatened to take my garden down. Every word was a hammer, breaking down the walls she'd built. Karen tried to shout over them. Quiet, quiet, all of you. This meeting is under my control. And that's when I said the words that silenced even her. No, Karen. This meeting isn't under your control anymore, because your HOA doesn't exist, and in 3 minutes I can prove it. I pulled out my phone, projecting the county's online database onto the screen behind her. Clear as day, highlighted in red, inactive, charter dissolved. 3 minutes, that's all it took. The Queen's crown shattered. Neighbors stood, some angry, some relieved, some close to tears. Years of fear, fines, and humiliation gone in the blink of an eye. But Karen, she wasn't done. Not yet. Her eyes burned, jaw clenched, fists trembling around her clipboard. She had ruled too long to walk away quietly. She pointed straight at me, her voice a hiss. You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will make your life hell. For a moment, the room froze. Her threat hung heavy in the air. And then Hank stepped forward, steady and calm. No, ma'am, you've made all our lives hell long enough. It ends here. The room erupted in applause, not for me, but for the truth. For the first time in years, people felt free. But as I looked at Karen's face, I knew something dangerous. She wasn't walking away, not tonight, not ever. Because people like Karen, they don't surrender. They scheme. And her next move would be darker than any of us could imagine. The night after the meeting, the air around the ranch felt lighter. For the first time in months, I could sit on my porch without feeling her eyes watching from across the street. Neighbors walked their dogs with smiles instead of fear. Kids laughed louder in the yards. It felt like the spell had been broken. But I should have known better. Because when someone builds their entire identity on control, they don't just let it go. They claw for it, they bleed for it. And Karen wasn't finished. The first strike came quietly, a call to the zoning department. Suddenly, inspectors were on my land, measuring fences, poking at barns, scribbling notes like vultures circling a carcass. One of them pulled me aside, muttering under his breath. She's been in our office every day this week. Complaints nonstop. I told him straight, this is harassment. He shrugged, helpless. Doesn't matter, we're required to check when someone files. Karen was weaponizing the system. Next came the letters. Not HOA this time, anonymous, typed, slid into my mailbox. Words like your kind don't belong here. Sell before it gets worse. The kind of letters that drip poison into your sleep. But what shook me most wasn't the letters. It was the night I found my gate wide open. At first I thought maybe I'd left it unlatched, but then I saw the tire tracks. Deep, fresh, pressed into the mud leading onto my pasture. My cattle stirred, restless. Someone had been here. And the sickening truth hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to bury me in paperwork. She was trying to rattle me, to scare me. For a moment, standing there under the moonlight, I felt it. That old, familiar doubt creeping in. What if she wins? What if this never ends? But then I remembered the looks on my neighbors' faces when the truth came out. The relief. The courage they felt seeing her power stripped away. And I realized, if I let her scare me now, I wasn't just losing for myself. I'd be handing her back the crown. So I didn't back down. I started documenting everything. Every inspector, every letter, every tire track, photos, dates, records. If she wanted war, I'd fight smart. One evening, Hank knocked on my door again. She's been circling my house, he muttered, voice tight with anger. Parked out front with her lights off, my wife scared to sleep. That's when I knew it wasn't just me anymore. Karen was unraveling, lashing out at anyone she couldn't control, and like a cornered animal, she was dangerous. So I called a meeting, not in a clubhouse, not under her rules, but right there on my ranch. We gathered under the wide sky, neighbors in folding chairs, kids chasing fireflies while their parents whispered about what to do. They were tired, they were angry, and they were ready. I stood before them, holding up one of the anonymous letters. This is what she's doing now. Intimidation, harassment. We can't let her divide us or we'll lose everything we gained. Hank's wife spoke up, her voice trembling but strong. We lived under her thumb for years. We paid fines we didn't owe. We fixed things that weren't broken. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the fear. I'm done being afraid. Her words lit something in the crowd. Heads nodded. Murmurs turned to agreement. People weren't just ready to resist, they were ready to take a stand. And I knew then, Karen had made a mistake. Because by targeting me, she had brought everyone together. But in the shadows, beyond the glow of the porch light, I saw her. Sitting in her car at the end of the road, headlights off, watching. Her face pale in the moonlight, eyes locked on us. She saw her empire slipping away. She saw her subjects rising. And I swear, even from that distance, I could feel the heat of her rage. Karen wasn't done. She was just getting started. And the next move she made would cross a line no one thought she'd dare to touch. It was just after midnight when I heard it, the sharp crack of wood splintering in the darkness. At first, I thought maybe a storm branch had fallen, but the night was too still. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and froze. The gate to my barn was hanging open. I moved fast, boots pounding against the dirt, heart hammering in my chest. And then the beam of my light caught it, fresh gasoline glistening on the hay, a sickly sheen spreading in the glow. Someone had poured it everywhere. Someone wanted fire. For a long second, I couldn't breathe. My livestock were restless inside, shifting, low sounds of panic rumbling through the dark. If I had been asleep another hour, I might have woken up to screams, animals dying, flames swallowing the barn, maybe even my house if the wind turned. And that's when I saw it. A small red can, tossed in the weeds by the fence line. Gasoline. My fists clenched so hard the flashlight shook. There was no doubt who had done this, no doubt at all. Karen had crossed the line from control to destruction. I managed to move the cattle, washed down the hay before any spark could take, and stood there shaking under the cold night air. And for the first time in years, I felt real fury, not just at her, but at the thought that fear might have kept me quiet. If I hadn't been awake, this whole place could have been gone. The next morning, the sheriff's deputies came out again. I showed them the can, the hay, the tracks leading back toward the road. They nodded, took photos, scribbled notes, but one of them sighed. We can't prove it was her. No cameras, no witnesses, it'll be your word against hers. My stomach dropped. She had nearly burned me out, and still the law couldn't touch her. But I could. Later that day, neighbors gathered again. Hank, his arms crossed tight, said what everyone was thinking. She's out of control. If we don't stop her now, somebody's going to get hurt. The fear was gone now, replaced with anger. Mothers with kids, old couples who'd been here for decades, young families just trying to live in peace, they all stood with me. And that's when I knew we had something Karen never expected, unity. So we came up with a plan. Cameras, documentation, witnesses. If Karen wanted to play dirty, we'd shine a light on every move she made. I set up motion lights and hidden cameras around my property. Hank did the same. Others followed. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was protection. And sure enough, it didn't take long. Just 2 nights later, a motion alert buzzed my phone. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen. A car creeping slow along my fence line. Lights off. Windows down. And then, clear as day, Karen's face, glaring into the night as she tossed something onto my land. I checked in the morning. It was another letter. This one wasn't typed. It was scrawled in her handwriting, jagged, furious. This isn't over. You'll regret ever crossing me. That was her mistake. Because now I had proof. Proof of harassment. Proof of trespassing. Proof of threats. And once I handed it over, the sheriff's tone changed. They weren't shrugging anymore. They were listening. They were taking it seriously. But Karen didn't know yet. She still thought she had the upper hand. She strutted around in daylight, barking at neighbors, demanding compliance with rules that no longer existed. But behind her back, the tide had shifted. Every person she once scared now had a copy of that footage. Every voice she silenced now whispered louder, spreading the truth. And Karen, she was still blind to it, still drunk on the illusion of power. Until the day she made her boldest move yet, one that wouldn't just threaten me, but would drag the whole community into chaos. Because Karen wasn't content with small fires anymore. She wanted war. And she was about to get it. It started on a Sunday morning. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning when families should be sitting on porches, sipping coffee, listening to birds. But instead of peace, we woke to chaos. The rumble of trucks, the grind of engines, and then the sight of 3 county vehicles pulling into the neighborhood, clipboards ready, men in hard hats stepping out. At first, no one knew what was happening. People peeked from windows, drifted into the street in robes and slippers. Then the truth hit us like a hammer. Karen had filed a mass complaint, not against me this time, against everyone. Trash cans too visible, fences improperly maintained, yards non-compliant. It was a full-scale assault. She had dragged the entire neighborhood into her war. One officer read from his clipboard, "Failure to correct violations may result in fines or forced compliance." The crowd erupted, shouts, questions, anger boiling over, mothers demanded answers, fathers clenched fists, elderly couples shook their heads in disbelief, and standing across the street Karen watched, smiling, arms folded like a queen surveying her conquest. But what she didn't realize was that she had just made her biggest mistake. Because fear divides, but anger unites. I stepped forward, raising my voice over the noise. "Listen to me, she doesn't have this power anymore, she's bluffing. Everything she's telling them is built on lies, and I can prove it." I pulled out copies of the documents, the same ones I'd shown at the meeting. Expired charter, dissolved HOA, illegitimate enforcement. I handed them to the county officials. They flipped through the papers, eyebrows furrowing. One by one, their postures shifted, the hard edge in their tone softened. "If this is accurate," one said slowly, "then these complaints hold no legal weight." The neighbors surged closer, voices rising. "She took my money, she threatened to foreclose, she harassed my family." Karen's smile faltered. Her face flushed red, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She tried to shout, "Don't listen to him, he's twisting the truth," but the tide had turned. For the first time, the officials turned on her. "Ma'am, if these documents are correct, you may be in violation of fraudulent representation. You've been filing complaints under authority you do not have." The crowd exploded in cheers. Years of frustration poured out in a single wave of relief and triumph. People hugged, clapped, shouted her down. Hank raised his fist in the air, booming, "It's over, Karen, you're done." But as the crowd roared, I kept my eyes on her. Because while everyone else celebrated, I saw something darker. Her jaw clenched, her hands trembled, her eyes burned with something more than anger. It was desperation. And desperate people are dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the cameras, listening for the crunch of tires, the creak of gates. The footage of her face kept replaying in my mind, the way she looked when the county called her out. She wasn't finished. Sure enough, around 2 a.m, a motion alert buzzed. I grabbed my phone, heart racing. The grainy screen lit up with a figure creeping along my fence line. Not inspectors, not strangers, Karen. She wasn't carrying a clipboard this time. She was carrying a hammer. I watched in disbelief as she swung it against my mailbox, wood splintering under each blow. Sparks flew when she struck the metal post. She was destroying it piece by piece, wild and unhinged, as if tearing down that mailbox would somehow give her back the power she'd lost. I called the sheriff right then, adrenaline surging. When the deputies arrived, she was still there, panting, gripping the hammer with white knuckles. And for the first time, she couldn't talk her way out. They cuffed her on the spot. Neighbors gathered in their pajamas, watching as the woman who had ruled them for years was led away in the back of a patrol car. Some clapped, some just stared, too stunned to believe it. But even as she disappeared down the road, a chill ran through me, because Karen wasn't the kind to break quietly. She'd be back. And the next time, she wouldn't come alone. The neighborhood was buzzing like a hive on the edge of collapse. Karen's meltdown had spread faster than wildfire, but unlike before, her fury wasn't confined to petty insults or pink-highlighted violation letters. No, this was all-out war. And Mark, with his rancher's grit and unshakable calm, had finally drawn a line in the dirt she couldn't cross. By morning, word had spread that Karen had filed an emergency injunction against Mark. She claimed he was illegally using community resources to water his land and endangering property values by refusing to obey HOA bylaws. The kicker, Mark's property was legally outside HOA jurisdiction. But that didn't stop Karen. She had rallied her board, twisted words, and used her influence to get a court date set for the very next week. It was supposed to intimidate him, but Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he went quiet. And when Mark went quiet, people got nervous. That night, a low hum filled the ranch. Trucks rolled in under the cover of darkness, headlights dimmed, tires crunching softly against the gravel. Workers unloaded crates of supplies, pipes, and heavy-duty valves. Karen, peering through her upstairs window with binoculars, nearly choked on her coffee. She stormed out onto her porch in her robe and screamed across the still air. "What do you think you're doing?" But Mark didn't answer. He just tipped his hat, then turned back to his men. By sunrise, a small crowd had gathered near the property line. Neighbors whispered among themselves, torn between fear of the HOA and admiration for Mark's defiance. He stood in front of the gathered group, unrolling a large blueprint across the hood of his truck. "You see this here," he said, pointing to a bold line snaking across the page. "That's their pipeline, and this," he tapped another, "is my land. They're running water through it without permission. Now I gave them a chance to do things fair. They didn't listen, so I'm cutting the flow." The murmurs rose into shouts of shock and support. Some clapped, others gasped. Karen, who had marched right up with her phone out recording everything, shrieked. "You can't, this is theft of community property. This is a felony." Mark looked her square in the eye, his voice as steady as the rising sun. "No, Karen, what's a felony is trespassing and stealing from me. I'm just taking back what's mine." And then, before anyone could stop him, he pulled the lever on the massive valve that had just been installed. The ground shuddered, the pipes groaned, and then silence. The HOA's precious irrigation system went dry in an instant. Sprinklers sputtered and died across the community. Lawns that had been unnaturally green wilted before their owners' eyes. Karen screamed as if she had just witnessed a murder. "You've destroyed everything, you'll pay for this." But for the first time, the neighborhood didn't rally behind her. They stood frozen, watching Mark take control of the very thing Karen had wielded like a weapon. For months, she had fined, threatened, and punished people over grass length and water schedules. Now, the source of her power had been cut off, and it was Mark's hand on the switch. But Mark wasn't finished. He turned back to the crowd and held up a signed stack of papers. "This," he said, "is proof. Proof they've been running this line through my property without a legal easement, which means everything they've been doing has been unlawful. And as of right now, I'm filing for damages, not just for myself, but for every one of you they've bullied." The silence broke like glass shattering. Neighbors cheered, some hugged him. A few looked terrified of what Karen would do next. But Karen, she was shaking, her phone trembling in her hand. For the first time, she realized she wasn't holding the power anymore. She was watching it slip through her fingers. And in that moment, with her world unraveling and her control evaporating, Karen did something no one expected. She lunged forward, snatched the blueprint off the hood of Mark's truck, and tore it to shreds in front of everyone. The crowd gasped. Mark didn't move. He just stared at her, calm and calculating, while the shredded paper fluttered like confetti around her feet. Karen's voice cracked as she screamed, "I'll destroy you before you destroy me." But Mark only smiled, that slow, dangerous smile that told everyone watching, the war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors filled every bench, reporters lined the aisles, and at the center of it all sat Karen, her pink suit brighter than ever, though her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. She had been forced to face something she had never imagined, public scrutiny. For years, she had operated unchecked, her HOA board bowing to her whims. But now, her arrogance had dragged her into a battle she couldn't win. Mark sat across the aisle, calm as stone. His attorney shuffled papers, thick with evidence. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched low on her nose, adjusted her robe and cleared her throat. Case number 5491. Karen Lewis, on behalf of the Willow Creek HOA versus Mark Daniels. Karen rose dramatically, pointing her finger at Mark. Your Honor, this man has destroyed community property, endangered our neighborhood, and waged a campaign of harassment against me personally. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but the judge raised a hand. Mrs. Lewis, you'll have your turn, sit down. When Mark's attorney spoke, his voice was calm but sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. Your Honor, this isn't about Mr. Daniels attacking the HOA. This is about the HOA trespassing on his property, stealing water without legal rights, and using it to maintain artificial appearances while bullying homeowners into submission. We have maps, contracts, or rather, the lack of contracts, and eyewitness testimony to prove it. The judge's eyes narrowed. Show me. One by one, documents were presented. Land surveys, property deeds, and even emails Karen had sent to her board admitting she knew the pipeline ran illegally through Mark's ranch. The final blow came when a neighbor took the stand, an elderly man with shaking hands, who confessed that Karen had threatened to fine him into bankruptcy if he dared to side with Mark. Karen's composure cracked. She shot up from her chair, her voice breaking into a shrill scream. They're lying, all of them. He manipulated them, he tricked them, don't you see? He's turning everyone against me. The judge slammed her gavel. Sit down, Mrs. Lewis, or you'll be held in contempt. But Karen wouldn't stop. She stormed toward the bench, waving her arms, shrieking about conspiracies and betrayal. Her own lawyer tried to pull her back, but she shoved him away, shouting, You're useless. All of you are against me. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Security rushed in, grabbing her arms as she thrashed wildly. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, whispers turned into outright gasps. Karen, the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek, was being dragged out in handcuffs before her neighbor's eyes. But the twist was Karen's meltdown. It was what came next. The judge turned back to Mark. Mr. Daniels, not only do I rule in your favor, but given the blatant misconduct of the Willow Creek HOA, I am awarding you full control over the disputed land rights and granting damages in the amount of, she paused, adjusting her glasses, $750,000. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, disbelief. Mark didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He just nodded once, like a man who had finally seen justice settle the dust. But Karen wasn't finished, not really. As she was hauled past him, eyes wild and desperate, she spat out her last words. You think you've won, Mark, but this neighborhood will burn before I let you own it. Her voice echoed, even as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. The neighbors turned to Mark, uncertain, waiting. Slowly, he stood and faced them. You've all lived under her fear long enough, he said. It ends today. This isn't about me, it's about all of us. And if she thinks she can burn this place down, then she'll have to go through every one of us first. The crowd cheered, louder than ever before. For the first time, the neighborhood felt free. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Mark didn't linger. He walked back to his truck, the weight of victory heavy but steady on his shoulders. The pipeline was his now. The HOA's power was broken. But as he turned the ignition, he caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Karen, standing on the courthouse steps, eyes blazing with a promise of vengeance, even as police tried to push her back inside. Mark exhaled slowly. He knew this battle was won, but the war, that was just beginning. And if you think Karen was finished, you haven't seen anything yet. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.